Okay, so I'll put the link to this particular PDF in the description. It's Manetho, and well, it's 800 pages, but a lot of it has footnotes and other descriptions in there. But now, who is Manetho? He was a Egyptian priest, early 3rd century BCE, BC, and during the Ptolemaic kingdom. He was a priest who passed on, basically wrote down the Egyptian history that still is a big part of the official portion. However, so for instance, the Truth of Thoth, Gift of Thoth is also accredited to. Now, his work Egyptiaca is still very important. For a long time was very important, but before we go there, let's have a look at Athanasius Kircher, Jesuit scholar. He wrote Oedipus Egyptiacus, and it was commissioned by Ferdinand. But this is there's some shenanigans sort of going on. So what we have is during the 1600s. Now, this is all the work of Kircher, including the Nomad, which was to be used later on by people such as John Dee and these other hermeticists and alchemists. Descriptions of Isis, now even P, the fecundus, the water pail, or the bucket there, which is fertility and irrigatum. Okay, now and again he's using Egyptian terms and then sort of mixing them with Greco-Roman. He also, like for instance, one of his illustrations, the famous labyrinth, was described by Herodotus. But what I'm getting at is if we go to Manetho, and so in his history he describes, okay, before we go there, let's look at the King's List at Abydos. And the King's List, and you'll see by most descriptions, begins with King Narmer or Nemi, which was the beginning of the Old Kingdom. This is how it is described. Now that King's List was actually two halves to it. So what we have is the King's List was also missing many kings: Hyksos, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and King I. Now there was a recent pyramid that's been discovered, and many believe that it's the pyramid of King I. But so what we have is beginning with 1, and we're going up to the 19th dynasty. Now in Manetho, his first book is, he writes a history of, and he mentions Thoth, that this wisdom come from Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus. So Thoth, who invented writing, the god of weights and measures, new script called hieroglyphics, which his son has, Hermes Trismegistus, who is the second Hermes. Hermes, or Mercury to the Romans, was the god of knowledge, science, weights and measures as well. And now, for instance, he gives a list of Egyptian history beginning in, going back to the time of the gods, and a total of 13,900 years. But then if we include the demigods and the spirits of the dead, we have a total with 24,925 years, very, very close to 25, so 100 years from precession of the equinoxes. Now, when amongst the history described by Manetho, when it's sort of up from the King's List, it's recognised and it's accepted, generally speaking. However, and like back now to Kircher and his history. Now, I haven't been through the whole thing, but what we have is, okay, it's a little bit out. Athanasius Kircher, the last man who knew everything. And I'll put by Paula Findlin. Now, she's talking about, Kircher, but it's also, there's some interesting points here about how dating was done, and how the Jesuit Kircher and many others at that time especially, and even going up until up to Petri were built their history on the Bible and on the Jewish history. And so Abraham and Noah, and they did not like this idea of this much older chronology. Now, even by some chronology, so for instance, Manetho has the 31 dynasties prior to Alexander becoming the pharaoh goes back over 5,000 years. So no fewer than 5,000. So the 31st dynasty ended as Scaliger in 329 BC with Alexander's conquest of Egypt, but the period from the 1st to the 31st dynasty covered in Manetho no fewer than 5,335 years. So 7,000 years ago. Accordingly, begun not just before the deluge, but before creation itself, even before the beginning of Scaliger's Julian period of 4,700 BC. And you can read, because Jesuits already identified Scaliger, pronunciation, has public enemies sharpen their nibs. And so what you saw, there was this very strong Judeo-Christian tradition to try and make it fit in within, because they still were saying that the pyramids were grain storehouses and that it was built by the Israelites and then there's been trying to shorten and bring things in together. For instance, the story of Babel, Kershaw II declared on the basis of the irrefutable testimony of sacred scripture that no individual kingdom could have existed before the confusion of tongues of Babel. Once again, he followed Ludicis, whom he quoted in arguing that the first 16 dynasties must have been fewer in number or very short. And so Oedipus Egyptiacus, so even before the flood. And so there was this was not well taken, and this this view extends back before modern Egyptology. It's actually birthed in the trying to make all things biblical. For instance, Newton up to not Weiss, what's the other fella's name? Who these early Egyptologists of the 1800s, and they were basically saying that the Bible has to that the pyramid was a biblical structure, that it told the years of the number of generations before Jesus and this type of thing. That the pyramidal inch was also a conversion to make it all very biblical and basically to fit the scriptures of the Bible rather than and the flood story. Now, I'll put these links. Now, this is the whole. Again, there's a lot, and this, if you read through the footnotes here, you'll see that again they're trying to reduce the number of the age of not only King Narmer, and for instance the Narmer palette, which could go back much further. It's interesting to note that the Petri also pushed back King Narmer to not 3,000 BC, but at least 1,000 years earlier than that. But Hermes Trismegistus, O Egypt, of thy religious rites naught will survive, but the idle tales which thy children's children will not believe, naught will survive but words graven upon stones that tell of thy piety. And for instance, never has arisen a more complicated problem than that of Manetho from this, not sure, again, German, I'm guessing, 1845. And if we go, like, for instance, page 42. And so, for instance, again, they're trying to, again, well, not trying to, but they've got the belief of of shortening the years. And so they're saying that 1 year was a lunar year or a month, and so to reduce these times to a different part. But again, they're talking about the solar year. So he does, Manetho mentions the solar year in some references to there, and that would fit in with other elements as well. So yeah, so is it? I've lost the page. But again, you can, if you do want to go through it, you can see that there is this trying to reduce the age. So total to again to use lunar months or like a year on the moon is one orbit of the Earth. So one rotation. So just like the one rotation, solar year is a one Earth around the sun once. The moon goes around the Earth, so we call it a month, but it's the same mechanism. And okay, I've lost it now. It's a big text. I've only gone through a relatively small portion of it, but yeah. So again, and you'll find the footnotes of what other people later wrote about Manetho, and now even the wiki page on Manetho is not too bad. Yeah, okay, well, I'll leave it at that, but I'll put this link to this longer text. Now, there are shorter versions of it, but I think this one would be better because it also shows the writings and criticisms of others, and especially how the church especially was very strict about trying to where is it? So Chaldean, or let's say Babylonian, Mesopotamian sort of era. Egyptian astrologers claimed their art carried for tens of thousands of years, and the reference to the 30 dynasties. This is again Athanasius Kircher. Can I extend that? Athanasius Kircher, The Last Man Who Knew Everything by Paula Findlin. And yeah, again, so this I would say at the same time on a separate topic, because I've been looking into the Hermeticists and alchemists and the amount of funny business that goes on to conceal certain things, and to basically there's a massive amount of scientific knowledge, really, really important stuff in the Hermetic writings which come from Hermes Trismegistus, and you can trace it back through time to people such as Zoroaster, which is described up in here, and basically the weights and measures and chemistry practiced back at that time, which again, so how did they make such pure gold and the metal, and even that even just with vinegar, limestone dissolves in vinegar. If you add vinegar to just your traditional cutting technique, you can cut through at least limestone very quickly. But again, that's unfortunately people still look at pure copper rather than the arsenical copper, which was the nature the actual copper they had, and how that applies to, because the purity and it was an alloy. They were making sophisticated alloys, and also you can work stone with what we would call it basic chemistry now, but it can't be attributed to an earlier period. I won't go too far into that. Okay, with that I'll put those links in the description, but especially with Manetho. Okay, talking about that's there was it was a biblically based. It was driven by the church, and to make these dates fit in with the Bible stories and the accepted history of the times. And so, for instance, around about that time, they still believed that the Earth was, not only so many thousands of years old, and everything had to fit in with the flood and the Bible chronology. Now, anyway, you'll find that so around page 170 onwards, especially, is an interesting portion on that book. Links in the description. Have a good one.